last week, the World Bank reported that Nigeria has improved in promoting businesses. Now, Nigeria moved 15 places up the ladder in the 2020 Doing Business report to 131st from 146th position last year. The ranking is Nigeria's best performance since 2011. Now, for Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, this is a welcome development, but more needs to be done. Let's talk to the head of research and advocacy, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Matthew Ojo. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Jahan. Thank you for beating that rain and those floods out there to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Okay, Nigeria moved up 15 places in the ranking that the World Bank released last week. Should we actually be celebrating?
Well, whether we should celebrate or not, at least we, first of all, need to commend the effort of the government, especially that of the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council. You could see that their effort is yielding results. However, we also need to draw attention. When we talk about the World Bank report, we look first at the score, we look at the ranking. What does all this mean? First, the score is just telling us an economy's absolute position relative to best regulatory performance, while the ranking, of course, is looking at our position relative to other countries. So you see that the main issue is about regulation, the regulatory environment. The core focus of any regulation is to enable freedom for doing business. But when that regulation now becomes an impediment, then we need to be careful. Now, we've done well. We've moved 15 places. But let's look at it. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we are in 17th position. When it comes down to the West African region, we are 5th. We are behind countries like Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Senegal. So we need to do more. That means that there's a need for us to think and look at areas. Well, the rankings actually, for us, is we've done well in those areas when it comes to starting a business. What happens to sustaining that business? Well,
so, in other words, you're saying that, this report does not really reflect the realities, on ground as to, doing business.
Well, in some areas, it does. In some others, no. For example, if you look at, we did well, according to the report, in access to electricity. And if you go down the report, you see that what they said was that engineers had access to inspect the installations. That is very simplistic. But when it comes to having access to whether 24 hours power supply, we all know that we have a long way to go. However, you could also see that government is making effort. The report looked at 10 areas. We didn't do well in 3. Those 3, they mentioned that of getting access to credit. They looked at tax payment and also protecting minority investment. Those are the kind of things that Nigeria should focus on. While this report can give us that confidence that we can get there, we also need to look at areas not mentioned in the report. For example, what happens to insecurity? No matter how well you do in all these other areas, those indicators, when a country is not perceived to be safe enough for investment, investors will look the other way. And then also existing businesses will suffer. So government needs to look at that. Then the main thing is infrastructure. Of course, power has been mentioned. What about the roads? You need to look at the transportation system when it comes to business. How efficient is our transportation business? We need to move goods and services across the nation. So those areas are still, they are the sole areas that government needs to now start working on.
Okay. Shortly after the release of that report, your chamber came up with kind of a press release raising some of these concerns. And you pointed out the sampled cities that is not quite holistic. Perhaps the World Bank centered on Lagos and Kano. So which other cities do you think should have been captured in this report to actually bring out the proper perspective of what doing business is like in Nigeria?
Thank you very much. Of course, the first that comes to mind is Aba in the east. Okay, I think previous reports have always also considered Aba. Aba is like the commercial nerve center in terms of industrial, whatever, you have industries located there. Aba is not captured. Next report can also look at what is happening in Abuja, what's happening in Port Harcourt. Okay. So
what about Onitsha?
Onitsha, we mentioned Onitsha in that report. Onitsha, Aba. No, if those areas are captured, probably we'll have a better. That is not to take anything away from the report. Those areas that, like business registration, we are doing well. However, a holistic approach to this study can give us a picture that all of us at least will be able to say this is a true representation of what it is to do business in Nigeria.
All right. Now, you did mention that Nigeria, of course, in that report didn't do well in terms of credit, access to credit. And, well, we know that even though the interest rates have been relatively high, the central bank has been doing quite a lot to support in that area. Do you think there is more to be done, perhaps by the fiscal authority also in this area?
Yeah, for the fiscal authorities, of course, I've mentioned the area they need to focus on is on infrastructure, because we need to get that right. Take, for example, Togo. Togo is the leading country in West Africa. When they got the report, they set a target for themselves. They said they want to be the leader in West Africa, and they went for it. They looked at how to register business easily. They looked at credit, and now they are there. So for us, Nigeria said, okay, we want to be in the 70th position by 2023. That's a good target. But you see, once we're able to address the issue of insecurity, infrastructure, that will give us a huge leap, because those are the sore areas that Nigeria is yet to really resolve. All these other areas, they are just, you can call them the preambles. The main areas, insecurity, infrastructure, access to credit, like you did mention, the central bank is already doing something in that area. Hopefully, by the next report, we would have done better, especially when it comes to credit. With the CBN, increasing the LDR to 60 and then later to 65%. We hope that will also increase access and enable businesses cheap access to credit. That is what we need to make these businesses survive. Now, let me mention something. In terms of regulation, there's also this huge gap between the policymakers and the foot soldiers, those who implement. There's always this mentality as if they are out there to capture or to deal with businesses. No, that is a wrong perspective. The government needs to do a lot when it comes to that. There's a regulation for business. It is meant to make doing business easier. So those implementing should be educated. But shouldn't there
be a monitoring mechanism to that?
Well, that is where PBEC also has to do a lot of work, because PBEC is making so much effort to transform the business environment. However, when it comes to those who are implementing, you are not there to destroy the business. You are there to help the business survive through the regulation or regulations passed by the government. So the mentality has to change if we need to make much progress.
All right. Then another area which you did mention, of course, is the tax payment. Now, multiple taxation, your chamber complaint has remained an issue. Are you saying the tax reforms that the government has put in place so far has not yielded some kind of results?
Well, like I always say, we are making progress. It's just that we are not yet there. The issue of multiple taxation is real, especially when it comes to you looking at it from the state and local government perspective. That needs to be addressed so that tax payment is streamlined. Even at the state and local government level, businesses understand what they have to pay and when they have to pay. But as it is now, you have various levies, you have various charges, some coming from the state government, some coming from the local government. This will not and is not helping businesses to grow.
Okay. Now, the informal sector, of course, was not captured in this report. How do you think this can actually be addressed?
It can be addressed by making it easier for them to transit. You see, when from the informal sector, there's always this desire for them also to transit into the formal sector. That process needs to be helped. They need to be taught how to organize their businesses, how to take records, how to ensure that they move from where they are now. Because for example, Nigeria has like the largest informal sector, okay, in Africa. If we move like just 30% of those in the informal to the formal, you will see that there'll be growth in that in the business environment. But as it is now, this report doesn't look at that, because when they are not organized, you can't get enough information as you want.
Now, an interesting one, the trading across border. You don't seem to agree with the claim there of improvement in trading across border. Why so?
Well, because, this report is was prepared prior to what we're experiencing now. Of course, the borders can't be closed in perpetuity. Our focus has always been that you should look at the government agencies responsible for manning our borders. Everybody looks at, presently the government is talking about smuggling, okay, or our neighboring countries. But what about a Nigerian custom? What about immigration? We need to find a way of developing their capacity so that they will be able to do their statutory, duties. When smugglers are coming and we have an effective and efficient customs service or immigration service, they won't have an easy inroad into the country. So they are working. We have to mention that they are doing well, but they can do better. So the government needs to see how can we restructure, how can we invest in ICT infrastructures, even at the land borders, so that we don't have to start closing borders every now and then. The question is, we have closed the border now. After some time, the borders will be open. Then what happens next? Is it going to be business as usual? We can't be depending on other countries to do something. We have to look inward and find a way. If we don't trade across borders, of course, the AFCTA agreement is going to be affected, and we need to do something urgently.
Now, the government has expressed its desire and intention, of course, to be among the top 70 countries by 2023. How feasible do you think this would be?
Well, it's feasible, but the first thing is let's take it one step at a time. What is our target? 2023, 2 years' time. But what is our target in 1 year's time? Do we want to be the leader in West Africa? Maybe we should look at that first. Let's be the leading country. We are the largest economy in Africa, for God's sake. So can we lead in the ease of doing business in West Africa? And then thereafter, we can go ahead. Last year's report, Togo they scored, in their points, they scored 55.2. But this year, they scored 62.3. Nigeria last year, our score was 52. Now it is 56.9. Just 4-point increment. So we need to start taking those steps gradually. Of course, we'll get there if we address infrastructure, if we address the issue of policy. If we bring out one policy today, tomorrow you turn it over. You can imagine someone who must have spent millions or billions of naira investing, and one day policy comes out and turns the whole thing overboard. So policy has to be stable, and the regulatory environment also needs to understand that they are created to make business survive. And then, of course, the issue of insecurity.
And then what roles do you think the private sector can actually play in all of this?
Well, the private sector also needs to support the government in its efforts to make ease of doing business achievable in Nigeria. The private sector can support in ensuring that they pay their taxes as at when due. They also can help invest in areas and support government even in providing infrastructures through their corporate social responsibilities. Well, you see, these things, they go hand in hand. If the government's regulations are favorable, of course, the private sector will also have what it takes to support the government. So they need to work together with the government to achieve whatever target the government is aiming at. Okay.
You keep mentioning policy and regulatory, environment. Now, there seem to be some constraint, particularly in terms of training of the public affairs. How do you think this can be addressed?
Well, you see, I did mention that the government comes out with a policy, and the aim is that they want this achieved. When it comes to implementation, there's a gap. In the previous report, the World Bank did mention the importance of public service being trained, their capacities being developed along the line of what government wants. Because when they understand what the regulation is, you have a better chance that they will implement it properly. And then the intention of government will be achieved. So that goes back to PBEC. I don't know how the plans they have to train public servants so that they carry out these regulatory injunctions or the regulations of government as the government intends it to be. Then you can see the results coming out. Not now. Now it's like a cat and mouse issue. The regulators see themselves like the police, the business people don't want to see the regulator. That shouldn't be, because something is lacking, something is missing. Training, capacity building, you can't play with those two.
Now, but in all of this, and perhaps coordinating the business, most of these businesses are under Lagos Chamber of Commerce, I guess. So how do you mediate? Where do you come into this to ensure that both the businesses and, of course, the regulatory authorities have a meeting point?
Well, that's our rule. That's why we carry out advocacy, okay, to ensure that what the government plans to do does not hurt the business environment. And also the business environment also needs to understand that they have their own responsibilities. So that when we stand in the gap by ensuring that whatever policies or regulations that comes out is beneficial to the business community, and especially our members too. Because when they grow, the economy grows, employment is tackled, people earn income, and then you can now see the poverty rate can come down. But when everything is one is attacking the other or is not favorable to the other, then if they are not producing, there's no employment, people can earn income, and then we keep on increasing our poverty rate. God forbid. So that's our role, to ensure that the business community and the government, they are in sync when it comes to progress, and one does not hurt the other, but they can be mutually beneficial to each other.
All right. Now, talking about improving doing business in Nigeria, how would you assess generally the recent government policies?
Well, honestly speaking, the recent government policies are, you always have this belief that government has good intentions. Right? But then we also, when it comes to access to credit, you can see what the CBN is doing. You can also see what PBEC is doing. When recently, I know you can report the government now by the reportgov.com. I saw something was not going on well in the airport, and I used that medium, and I got prompt response. So government is making effort, but then there are some policies you also need to tell the government, look, this you need to have a rethink. For example, the recent closure of the land border. They have their reasons. But what we are saying is that, have you weighed the pros and the cons? Farmers are producing well and others. But then we also have some companies who produce in Nigeria and they take out to our neighboring countries to sell legitimately. Of course, you can say go through the ports, but some of us know how the ports are actually. So it's neither here or there. It's like you make progress here and then you bring out some other policies that will affect. But generally, I think we are not where we used to be, okay? But we are not yet where we want to be. We are just gradually making progress. And I hope in future, government will find a way of weighing policies and then ensure that the advantages far outweighs the consequences.
Right. So what major thing do you think, drastic measure do you think the government can actually do now to have this lofty, to beat up with these lofty needs that we have?
The first thing for us, although they are already working on insecurity, infrastructure. Look at the 2020 budget. The ratio is 70 to 30. 70 recurrent, 30 for capital. And it's even worse for 2021 and 2022. It's 80-20. So governments, they've come out with ways and means by which they want to fund capital expenditure. But we need to also ensure that we make bold progress in ensuring infrastructure, the roads, the ports, and then the policy environment. The government needs to improve on that. And like I've mentioned it over and over, you cannot take insecurity out of all this.
All right, let's just hope we get to achieve all of that.
So,
Dr. Matthew Ojo is the Head of Research and Advocacy at Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Let's take another break, and when we come back, we do an opening call to the markets. Just stay with us.